We are going to read The Partner's Tale, Death's Murderers. The man Grab was slumped over a table at the Tabard Inn in Southwark. You may know the place. He had whetted his brain in beer, and it weighed heavy. The clanging of the church bell registered dully in his ears. "Who are they burying?" he asked. Old Harry, the landlord, who was wiping tables close by, said, "Don't you know? I wondered why you weren't at the funeral, him being a friend of yours. It's Collie the Fence. Caught it last Wednesday and gone today. Him and his wife and his 2 boys." "Caught what?" demanded Grab, grasping Harry's arm. "The Black Death, of course." Then another customer chimed in. "Ah, they do say the plague came to Combleton over yonder, and Death laid hands on every man, woman, and child, and carried 'em off." "Where? Carried them off where?" demanded Grab, fighting his way through drink haze like a ghost through cobwebs. "Who knows where Death carries men off to?" said a deeply hooded character sitting in the corner of the bar. "But he sure enough comes for every man in the end. And he's taken twice his share recently, thanks to the plague." Tears of indignation started into Grab's eyes. "I don't see what gives Death the right to go carrying off anyone," he slurred. "And if you ask me, it's about time some brave soul stood up to Death and put an end to his carryings on. His carryings off, I mean. Dip, Cut, where are you?" And he stumbled off into the sunlight to look for his 2 closest friends. Dip was at home in bed, but not for long. Grab knocked him up and called him into the street. They met with Cut coming home from a card game and cursing his empty pockets. Grab threw an arm over each friend's shoulder. "Have you heard? Old Collie the Fence is dead. Death carried off him and all his family in a couple of days. Let's take an oath, friends, not to rest until we've tracked down this Death fellow and stuck a knife between his ribs. Think what the mayor and parish would say if we brought in Death's dead body. Besides, how many purses do you think he's emptied on a dark highway, eh? Death must have made himself quite a walletful by now." Cut fingered his sharp penknife, the one he used for cutting purses. Dip felt his fingers itch at the promise of rich pickings. "We're with you, neighbor Grab," they cried, and off they reeled, not the sum total of 1 brain between the 3 of them. They looked for Death in the graveyard, but decided he must be out hunting the living instead. They looked for Death in the fields, but he had always gone before they arrived, leaving the flowers doomed to wither and the leaves, sooner or later, to fall. Then, as the daylight failed, they saw a small figure on the road ahead. "We've caught him up!" cried Grab, and they fell on the man with failing fists. "Wait a minute! This isn't Death at all," said Cut, letting his penknife fall. "He's just some silly old duffer. Look at him. He's older than Methuselah." The old man peered at them out of the dark recess of his hood. His face was as white and bony as a skull, with purse-string lips and eyes sunk deep in red whorls of wrinkled skin. His hands were as brown as vinegar paper, and his back hunched over like a turtle shell. "What do you want with me? Don't I have enough to put up with? Can't you leave a poor blighted old creature in peace? You're no good to us, Dip said in disgust. We wanted Death, not some wrinkled old prune on legs. A bitter laugh creaked out through the creature's gappy ribs. You want death? Not half as much as I do. I'm the one poor beast alive that death can't carry off. I'm condemned to live forever and to creep about the earth in this worn out old body, getting older and older and older. As for death, I've just left him under that oak tree yonder. If you hurry, you'll find him still there. Cut's knife was raised again. So, you've had dealings with him. We'll kill you anyway. The fossil of a man let go a sigh that seemed to break through his brittle skin. I wish you could rob me of this tedious burden, life. You should pity me, even if you have no respect for my old age. But don't bother to batter on this prison my soul calls a body. You can't free me from it. He shuffled out from under their raised blades, muttering, You're the lucky ones. You might die today. Get to bed with the maggots and moles, you old relic of the devil, Grab cursed. We're on our way to kill death. Then no one will have to die anymore. As soon as the old man was out of sight, the three accomplices forgot him completely. Under the oak tree, there was no sign of death. But there was a pot of money as big as any crock of gold at the rainbow's end. Cut tipped the jar over with his foot, and the wealth of 7 lifetimes spilled out onto the grass. They looked around. No one was even in sight. And there had been no attempt to hide the gold. It lay there, just inviting them to keep it. Grab and Dip and Cut were suddenly rich. Rich, we're rich, 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 rich. As the gold coins spilled out of the jar, so all thoughts of their plot to kill Death dropped out of their minds. Dip, your legs are youngest, said Grab. Run into town and fetch us some wine. We've got to celebrate luck like this. Man, why is it always me? Dip threw a sulky look at the gold, but was given only 1 coin to buy the makings of a party. We'll both stay and guard it. Don't you worry, Grab assured him. Be quick, lad. When you get back, we'll decide what we're to do with it all. What mansions we'll build, who to bribe, and what monks we'll pay to have done in. We don't have to do our own dirty work from now on, boy. We'll be the 3 kings of the thieves. Full of such thoughts, Dip set off into the dusk to buy cakes and wine. The sun was behind him, and his shadow stretched long and spidery ahead, so that he was all the time stepping into his own darkness. Grab and Cut watched him go, then sat down on either side of the pot of gold. They counted the coins. Somehow it always came to a different number. 848 or 916 or 772? Grab scowled. Of course you realize we can't divide it three ways. We can't. You take my word for it. It won't share out evenly. It won't. Two ways, yes, not three. One of us will have to take less. Oh. Cut decided at once that since Dip was the youngest, he should take the smallest share. They both nodded to themselves and settled back to counting the gold. This time, there seemed to be 999, or 783, or perhaps 870. But it did not change their opinion that Dip should have less. Of course, it won't go far between the three of us, Grab mused. Not with the cost of living how it is. And you know how Dip squanders money. No. He'll soon have spent all of his, and he'll be asking to borrow from us. But I can't spare any of mine, said Cut anxiously. No more can I. There's little enough to share out between two, let alone three. They lapsed into silence, and above them the oak's heavy branches groaned, while the gold coins clinked between their fingers. Supposing, said Cut, just supposing Dip was to meet with an accident on his way back from town. So many thieves these days, said Grab, nodding sadly. So many ruffians and murderers. Meanwhile, Dip was watching his shadow move ahead of him on the roadway like a black plow. How big it was! How much bigger than him! When he had his share of money, he would be a bigger man in every way. No more creeping through the crowds at fairs, cutting purses, and catching the pennies that dropped. He could walk tall and stately in fur-trimmed robes, and people would touch their forelocks and step aside. Beggars would fight for the chance to plead with him. And, if he felt like it, he could drive them away with a pelting of money and see them grovel in his wake. Ah, but if he was going to start giving money away, there would be less for the true necessities: drink and woman and gambling. In fact, he could think of so many good uses for the gold that it seemed a pity Cut and Grab had been with him when he had found the jar. Really, the more he thought about it, the less fair it seemed that they had bunked in on his good fortune. As he reached the outskirts of the town, he noticed an apothecary sign hanging over a door. He did not remember ever having seen it before, but he knocked without hesitation. What's your trouble, young man, that you rouse me from my bed? An ancient, hairless head poked out of an upstairs window, grotesque and vaguely familiar with its parchment yellow shine. Rats, said Dip, his head muffled up in his cloak. The rats are eating me out of house and home. Here, one drop of this will finish them off. Have it for free. The ancient apothecary must have had the poison in his pocket, for he dropped it down at once into Dip's outstretched hands. It couldn't be simpler, he called, as the boy hurried off to the inn. Dip bought 3 bottles of wine. Every last drop of the poison went into 2 of the bottles. The third he marked carefully to be sure of telling it apart. Then he was off to collect his rightful share of the golden hoard. Every last coin of it. In the pitch dark of the late evening, he stumbled over Cut and Grab snoozing under the oak tree in the deep grass. "Thought you'd forgotten us," said Grab with a sort of grin. "I wouldn't forget my two old friends, now would I?" Dip opened his bottle of wine and took a swing. "Have a drink, why don't you?" Cut and Grab knelt up and groped for the wine, their hands brushing Dip's face in the dark. They moved to either side of their good friend. Along the road came the sudden noise of the play cart, rattling out of the town towards the lime pits in a ring around a rosy hollow. Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies. Ashes, ashes, they all fall down. They all three watched its creaking progress beneath the light of the coachman's torches. Its white cargo of dead bodies joggled against one another like restless sleepers. A limp arm dangling through the cart rails swung to and fro, for all the world, as if it was beckoning them. "We took an oath to kill Old Death," said Cut, remembering. "We'll get round to it sometime," said Grab, drawing his dagger. "One thing at a time." He plunged the knife into the back of Dip's neck. It met with the seam of his hood, and the lad looked around in astonishment, in time to make out the shape of Cut outlined against the moon. Then Cut's sharp penknife caught him under the ribs, and he sprawled, cursing to his death, among the gnarled roots of the oak tree. "It's done," Grab panted, and his throat felt suddenly dry. "Let's drink to our partnership, Cut. Where did he put the bottles?" By feeling along the ground, they found the 3 bottles in the long grass. The open one had emptied itself into the ground, but the others were intact. A bottle apiece, Cut and Grab sat with their backs to the oak tree and drank to their new-found fortune. In the morning, Death came back for his pot of gold. He wrapped it in the miserable rags of his decaying cloak, close to his gappy ribs. The 3 corpses under the tree made no move to stop him, and he left them to a wealth of flies and crows before continuing his endless journey. The gold weighed light in his arms. Though his bones were dry, and his muscles were like the withered tendrils of a grapeless vine, his strength was immense. He could carry off the biggest or strongest of men, even though, like any man or beast, he could never carry off himself.